Okay, so we're on page 8, talking about Liverpool and SKELMERSDALE. Liverpool depended heavily on traditional industries, so it was badly hit by the industrial decline in the late 20th century. The city's working class areas were already pretty poor, and things went from bad to worse. Liverpool suffered badly from the industrial decline. By the late 20th century, Liverpool was a major port and had been a centre for trade for hundreds of years. This provided lots of jobs at the docks, and many jobs were also provided by the shipbuilding industry. So at the beginning of the century, it was a really good place to live, to work, because it was a major port. Remember, hundreds of years before, it was part of the slave trade, so it started from there. And grew, and it carried on being a major port for imports and exports, and for trading for over like hundreds and hundreds of years. There were lots of jobs at the docks, and this would be one of the things where a family would, all of the whole family would be employed, and it would be a case of you leave school. If you were working class, you could leave school and get a job at the docks, okay, because your dad worked there, your uncle worked there, maybe a couple of brothers, and many jobs were also provided by the shipbuilding industry. So not only were they there for imports and exports, they had a massive shipbuilding industry there as well. However, this made Liverpool very vulnerable to the industrial decline. In the early 1980s, Liverpool had one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. So if one of these industries were to be closed, that would mean hundreds, if not thousands of people were out of a job at the same time. Some men turned to crime and gangs in order to support themselves and their families. There were also riots in the early 1980s, fueled by high levels of unemployment. Remember, these people didn't have a job. And their emotions and their mental health would have suffered as well. So let's look at the character of Sammy. Sammy is involved in this gang culture. Whereas Mickey tries hard to find paid work, Sammy has been on the dole since he was 16. There's no mention of him ever having a job. Sammy seems to have chosen crime over employment, and you can link that back to looking up as gangsters as an idol. That's what he wants to be when he grows up. Instead of looking up at somebody like a doctor or a lawyer, maybe he looks up at people like Al Capone that were famous on the TV at the time. Many Liverpool residents were rehoused in the 20th century. So after World War II ended in 1945, Liverpool began rebuilding to replace the housing lost during the bombing raids. If we look at this house here, this is an inspection of a Liverpool slum in 1962. So to build these properties quickly after the war, they were very cheaply made, so they didn't last for very long. However, lots of these new council houses were constructed so quickly and cheaply that they were poor quality. Most had no heating, indoor toilets or gardens, and overcrowding was a problem. And this is the kind of housing that the Johnstones have in Act 1. And overcrowding is because of large families. We're going to touch on things like religion and beliefs later on in the book, and the reasons why there was overcrowding in families instead of birth control. So we've got cheap houses being built really quickly after the war, and because of that, the local health wouldn't have been very good either. So in the 1960s, the government began building new towns. So we're looking at SKELMERSDALE now, and these were small existing towns which were a little bit further out, which were extended and redeveloped to provide more housing for nearby cities. Now remember, this would have been like fields and fields of wildlife and grass and trees, and Liverpool decided that they would use that land to build new towns. So that's why Mrs Johnstone talks about getting out into the fresh air and stuff like that. Skelmersdale was one of these new towns, and many people were moved from Liverpool's council estates to Skelmersdale. Now remember, because they're renting off the council, they have to go where the council says. So they wanted to move them out so that they could bulldoze the houses and rebuild them again, but they had to put them somewhere. Some residents were upset to be moved from the area that they'd always known, and others saw it as an opportunity for a better life, which is what Mrs. Johnstone does. She was overjoyed when her family were rehoused in Skelmersdale and has a very idealistic ideas of what it will be like there. So she imagines that it's going to be all rosy and, you know, lots of fresh air and places to work and things like that. However, Skelmersdale was hit by the same problems as Liverpool when traditional industries went into decline. So many big employers left the town, and so many factories workers lost their jobs. So it wasn't as ideal as what she had imagined, because the problems of society that they had just moved to the new town. It went with them. As in most cities, Liverpool also has wealthy areas. Edward's house is described as big and up by the park, to emphasise how its size and outdoor space are so different from the Johnstones' estate. So when you're putting your answers down, try and link all of these things together. This is a key quote. "We'll be all right out here, away from the muck and the dirt." And Mrs. Johnstone gets a teeny bit carried away about moving to Skelmersdale, and before you know it, she's dancing around the streets and imagine having tea with a pope. This is the religious link. "I hear she likes scones, Mrs. J."